Vuitton is the world's most valuable luxury fashion brand. Its CEO, Bernard Arnault, is also the world's first richest man, with an estimated net worth of $211 billion. Looking at the company's current prosperity, you'd never think it was founded by a man who was homeless during his adolescence, had no education, and slept in the forest. Louis Vuitton is a remarkable success story. However, the corporation would also be the subject of a lawsuit, a hostile takeover, numerous litigation, and a slew of other issues. This is Louis Vuitton's bizarre story, and how a little family firm grew into one of the world's most powerful brands. Louis Vuitton, a homeless youth, Part 1. Was born in 1821 and grew up on his family's farm in the French hamlet of Arnault, in the middle of nowhere. They didn't have electricity or running water. Xavier, Louis's father, was a miller and farmer, while his mother Corinne produced hats for extra money. There is no evidence that Louis ever acquired an education. The closest school was 6 miles away, and it's believed he worked full-time on the family farm without ever learning to read or write. Louis would have been employed in the everyday. From nightfall until dawn, he worked in the fields to provide food for his family. Needless to say, the bloodline were in financial difficulty, and young Louis was born into it, a circumstance that should have doomed him to a bleak destiny. Then things got a lot worse. Louis' mother passed away while he was only 10 years old. His father soon wedded another woman. However, Louis' stepmother was extremely dominating and manipulative towards him, and he was continually getting into brawls with her. As a result, when he was just 13 years old, he ran away from home. His intentions was to visit Paris. He left in the middle of the night without even saying goodnight. The only difficulty was that Paris was 225 miles distant, and Louis had no money or food. As a result, he was compelled to stroll along unpaved paths. He slept in the woods most nights with an empty stomach, and he only had a cloak to keep him warm. He would do odd jobs whenever he came across a new village, in return for food or money. However, there was never enough money to cover housing costs. As a result, he continued to sleep in the woods or wherever he could find a place to sleep for the night. Louis was able to gain skills from craftsmen through his various odd jobs, and he learned how to experiment with metal, stone, fabric, and wood. However, travel was exceedingly slow at this rate. It took him 3 years to get to Paris. Part 2. Succeeding, Louis was able to get work as an apprentice boxer not long after arriving in Paris. Manufacturer and packer. Box producers would create custom-sized boxes for customers, as well as pack and unpack them whenever a client was about to travel. This employment provided him with the opportunity to meet many upper-class people asking for custom-made bags for their travels. Louis spent several years here learning the trade and working as hard as he could. In fact, the Empress of France became a customer in 1851 and was impressed by his outstanding craftsmanship. He was selected as her personal box maker, as well as packer. This is the highest honor that most box makers will ever receive. Throughout their professional lives, Louis had progressed from being a homeless adolescent with nothing to his name, to now employed in a respectable position among nobility. That was a great attainment in itself. But Louis Vuitton had higher plans for his future. After marrying at the age of 33, Louis used his savings to launch his own company and established his own box-making studio in Paris to start selling his own items. Louis had discovered a serious fault in the luggage of the day. All the tops of the boxes were circular domes made of leather. The main problem was packers had to carry the boxes one by one because it was impossible to stack them. Louis began exploring with other materials to employ. They discovered that canvas was lighter, more robust, and water-resistant. As a result, the trunks could have flat tops instead. Everything became more efficient as a result of this. Louis had already established a professional reputation at this point, as well as upper-class connections. So, when he unveiled his new bag range, it was an instant smash hit. He even developed a Louis Vuitton catalog for customers to peruse. Examine the things he has accessible and get them made before shipping them to their houses. After only 2 years of developing his revolutionary suitcases, as time passed, they were appraised as an elegant and must-have ornament among the elite, a status insignia, and the brand had grown so popular that he was receiving orders from all across the world, all throughout the world. He even started receiving orders from Egyptian royals. Louis made enough money in 1859 to recruit a team of craftsmen to help him complete his project and orders. He opened a new workshop outside of Paris and hired 20 people. Around that period, an increasing number of individuals began to travel by train and boat. So his potential clients grew at an exponential rate. Traveling was no longer pastime, only available to the wealthy. People from all walks of life now required high-quality luggage. It appeared that Louis had made it and would continue to flourish for the rest of his life. That was not the case, unfortunately. France was on the verge of war, and disaster was about to hit Louis Vuitton once more. Part 3. Begin again. The Franco-Prussian War broke out in 1870 when Louis was 49 years old. Louis possessed to escape his home and seek refuge in a crowded shelter with thousands of others. No food, he was running out of resources and worried for his life. When Louis was eventually allowed to return to his shop in 1871, everything had been destroyed. His windows had been damaged, his equipment had been stolen, and he had lost all he had fought so hard for. Instead of giving up, he opted to reconstruct the house using his funds, business, and promised it would be even greater than before. With so many individuals displaced by the conflict, there were considerably more vacant shops throughout the city. As a result, Louis Vuitton capitalized on this by opening his new store. It was perfect, in a much more opulent aristocratic setting in Paris, because it was close to the train station and the Grand Hotel, so travelers in need of new bags didn't have to drive far to visit a Louis Vuitton store. By 1872, he had created a completely new design, beige canvas luggage with stripes. This became extremely popular and people enjoyed showing it off. The contemporary fashion. Many other brands attempted to imitate his aesthetic, but his bags were so unique. Customers pick out a genuine Louis Vuitton bag despite their absurdly high quality. Louis worked at this new shop in Paris for the next 20 years, till his death at the age of 70. His legacy, however, was carried on by his son Georges, who took over the family firm. Georges aimed to expand the brand abroad, such as by building a successful London store. Louis' luggage was so popular at this stage that many other box makers copied it. They started to make forgeries. So, in 1896, Georges Vuitton released the now iconic LV monogram, more difficult to imitate. His father's initials were LV, in memory of the man who founded the company. He also proposed the trunks would have a revolutionary new lock that would make it hard for thieves to pick them. The company had 100 employees by 1900 and continued to grow. Year after year, it grows. All of the personnel were extensively trained in order to become expert box manufacturers. Even today, Louis Vuitton staff must undergo 18 months of training. It could take months to 2 years before they are trusted to create one of the products on their own. Because of another fashion icon, the company began to develop into a completely new line of items. Chanel, Coco. She ordered a little dome-shaped purse in 1925. To begin with, this was a design she created herself, and it was only for her. However, it was mass-produced and given the name Alma after that. This was enormously successful. As the Keepall became popular, Louis Vuitton began to produce more compact leather bags. Before Louis Vuitton, purses were frequently regarded as unattractive and large. However, the corporation had a significant role in them becoming increasingly fashionable. When Georges Vuitton died in 1936, the company was passed down to his son, Gaston Louis. Gaston, on the other hand, took over the corporation at a tough period because France would be at war again in a matter of years. Contracts were cancelled during World War II, and Gaston was obliged to leave. The Louis Vuitton factory was closed down. Paris was once again under siege. The only option Gaston Vuitton could salvage the company was to work with Nazi Germany. Stéphanie Bonvicini, an author, created a novel titled Louis Vuitton, a French epic. She inquired about viewing the firm archives during her study. Records from World War II. Almost immediately, firm representatives attempted to avoid revealing the knowledge to her. They claimed that all documentation from 1930 to 1945 were destroyed. A fire destroyed everything. However, following extensive research into other historical records, Stéphanie learned that Louis Vuitton was able to open a glitzy ground floor shop front in the Nazi regime. The Hôtel du Parc worked with them. Meanwhile, a number of other brands were forced to close due to their refusal to collaborate with the Nazis. Clearly, the firm was embarrassed by this chapter in their history, but Gaston would argue otherwise. He did everything he needed to do to ensure the company's survival. The designers of clothing, Coco Chanel, for example, worked with the Nazis to ensure her business's survival. Paris was not completely destroyed. If it hadn't been for their decision to collaborate with the enemy, their brands would most likely no longer exist today. Part 4. The Fight for LV. When Gaston died in 1970, his son-in-law, unlike his forefathers, Henry already had a lot of business knowledge from a previous company he ran. As a result, when he took over Louis Vuitton, he was able to take the company to new heights. Henry began making significant alterations to the Louis Vuitton brand in order to modernize it, develop it from a family-owned business to the gigantic enterprise that it is today. He changed the business paradigm of Louis Vuitton from wholesale to retail. By 1978, he developed his business into several other countries, including Japan. Over a 6-year period, sales increased from $20 million to $260 million after accounting for modern inflation. As a result, Henry chose to go public in 1984. Louis Vuitton sold all 1 million shares, each worth $63.63. Henry took advantage of the enthusiasm and influx of wealth and began opening businesses. More stores are being added all over the world. Louis Vuitton had hit $1 billion in revenues by 1987. It was a long time ago, beyond what young Louis could have imagined when he first launched his store in Paris. Henry also chose to merge the company with Moet Hennessy, a luxury drinks company. Champagne and cognac were manufactured. Together, they founded LVMH, a new luxury company. Bernard discreetly purchased 43% of Louis Vuitton stock and received assistance from the Moet and Hennessy families in order to obtain more control at LVMH. Henry felt betrayed by the man he'd brought in to assist him, so he took Bernard to court, requesting that he relinquish his majority ownership in Louis Vuitton. However, the courts eventually sided with Bernard. Henry was furious after being duped by his friend that convinced him to leave Louis Vuitton totally. Now, for the first time in nearly a century, no one from the Vuitton family was connected with the business. After all of the commotion of Bernard's aggressive takeover, Louis Vuitton sales began to crash. Journalists had stopped covering the brand. It appeared for a time that the company could fail. Bernard, on the other hand, knew how to turn the company's fortune around. Louis Vuitton was able to make a return when it began to partner with a number of designers. During its 100th anniversary collection, fashion designers participated. Famous individuals Vivienne Westwood and Isaac Mizrahi, for example, each devised their own interpretation of the legendary LV monogram. Customers had never seen anything like it before, and individuals were once again attempting to obtain a Louis Vuitton bag. Bernard's investment in Louis Vuitton eventually paid off handsomely. He is now the president and CEO of LVMH. Forbes named him the world's richest man in 2021, with a net worth of $186 billion. Of course, as stock values fluctuate, these rich list rankings shift. However, he is virtually constantly among the world's top 5 wealthiest persons. Among the wealthiest individuals, such as Bezos, Musk, Gates, and Warren, he is undoubtedly the least well known because he prefers to avoid the limelight. What we do know is that he is known as the wolf in Cashmere because of his harsh business image. As a result, LVMH now owns approximately 70 different brands across all of its subsidiaries. Bernard has completed a number of acquisitions and mergers. This one firm owns a large number of the most luxury brands in the world. Despite this, it all began with a broke homeless adolescent. Part 5. Contemporary Louis Vuitton in the current era. Louis Vuitton has continued to develop its brand with fresh, vibrant styles. A younger audience found it appealing. Marc Jacobs was appointed creative director in 1997. He created the first ready-to-wear line, as well as the renowned monogram Venice handbag. Marc Jacobs also expanded LV into watches, jewelry, and sunglasses, though he finally dropped LV. Would leave Louis Vuitton to launch his own collection of apparel and accessories. Of course, the business is not without problems. Louis Vuitton has a dedicated team of lawyers on the lookout for copyright infringement and will not hesitate to sue if they find it. They've even sued Google for search results. People are being led to bogus bags as a result of search results. However, Google won the case. They claim they have no control over what their users post on the internet. Louis Vuitton has also collaborated with businesses like as Supreme. It significantly broadened their demographic. However, believe it or not, Louis Vuitton actually sued Supreme for stealing their logo. Until they realized how profitable a copycat could be, collaboration would be beneficial. Louis Vuitton Supreme products now fetch a little fortune. As an example, the leather trunk is priced at $125,000. Even an LV Supreme sweater costs more than $5,000. Of course, Louis Vuitton has had a counterfeiting problem from its inception. The brand's business is still a concern today. They anticipate that every year they lose hundreds of millions of dollars each year as a result of counterfeit copies of their items. Nonetheless, even after 168 years in business, they don't appear to be stopping anytime soon. Louis Vuitton is still a brand that many people want to wear, and it's a favorite of the affluent and famous. They are currently the most popular fashion brand, the most valuable brand in the world, valued at $39 billion. With around 400 locations, almost every significant city in the world has a Louis Vuitton store. But what are your thoughts on Louis Vuitton? Do you believe that the hype has overvalued it? Or do you believe the high quality of the products warrants the high price?